On July 25, 1965, Bob Dylan played an electric guitar at the Newport Folk Festival. Before this, folk music was acoustic and the audience was mostly college students and activists. After the electrification of folk in 1965, a new subgenre emerged. The invention of folk rock revolutionized counterculture by making the music of the youth generation more politically focused. This meant that more people were receiving anti-war messages, contributing to the strong anti-war movement of the 60s. In the 30s, folk music started to gain popularity, characterized by its traditional sound and political messaging. Early folk was mostly listened to by the working class, but over time, the audience evolved to be mostly college-educated people. Lyrics put emphasis on honesty and meaning, often political, was left-leaning, and rebellious. Bob Dylan's song, Blowing in the Wind, perfectly illustrates the symbolic lyrics of early 60s folk music.
How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Rock music, on the other hand, had lighter lyrics and started in the 50s, after the invention of the solid-body electric guitar in 1940, becoming the primary voice of youth counterculture in the early 60s. By the 60s, social tensions were growing because of the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement, creating a more polarized political climate in the United States. But with the addition of the Vietnam War, which was starting to become unpopular by the middle of the decade, an already tense political environment split even more Americans, something that hadn't been seen to such an extreme since the Civil War. With this, more and more protests and distrust of the government led the counterculture of the 60s to be stronger and louder than before. The Newport Folk Festival was an important event in the folk community, showcasing the icons of the folk movement. The festival in 1965 was the fifth festival since its founding in 1959. It featured many folk icons, including Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul and Mary, and of course, Bob Dylan. On the last day of the festival, Dylan played his electric guitar, marking a change not only in folk music, but in 60s counterculture as a whole. There were different reactions to Dylan going electric. Pete Seeger, one of the directors at the Newport Folk Festival and an important figure in Dylan's music career, famously said,
"I was furious that the sound was so distorted you could not understand a word that he was singing. He was singing a great song, Maggie's Farm, a great song. But I was so mad, I said, damn, if I had an axe, I'd cut the cable right down. I really was that mad."
At the end of the performance, the audience responded with both cheering and booing, but overall, the performance was well regarded, with one newspaper saying, "The hardcore of Dylanites rationalizes the electric project as a departure for the good. And if one has the right to pioneer a sound within the framework of folk, Dylan has earned this chance to explore this new frontier." But this wasn't merely a change for Dylan. It was a change for music in general. After Dylan went electric, many other folk artists did the same, creating one of the most influential genres in the Vietnam War era, folk rock. Folk rock combined the lyrics of folk and the sounds of rock. Suddenly, the political lyrics of folk became the lyrics of mainstream youth music. This was huge. Going electric created a sense of urgency in protest music that traditional folk music wasn't able to give. Folk rock quickly became the voice of youth counterculture, and its songs became anthems for the anti-war movement. Eve of Destruction by Barry McGuire was banned on many radio stations because of its anti-war lyrics.
Enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating, but you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Buffalo Springfield's For What It's Worth, though not originally an anti-war protest song, soon earned its place alongside the most well-known protest music repertoire.
Young people speak in their minds. are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Creedence Clearwater Revival's song Fortunate Son poked at the unfairness of the draft, singing about how class unfairly affected who was sent to Vietnam. After the Kent State shootings, Neil Young reacted with a folk rock song, Ohio. As protest increased, so did the popularity of folk rock. Folk rock gave protesters a microphone that allowed more people to be heard. But not everyone sided with the intense protests and anti-war movement of the 60s. Many people found the new influence of folk rock dangerous. Gary Allen, a politically conservative social critic at the time, wrote, "Music is now the primary weapon used to make the perverse seem glamorous, exciting, and appealing. Music is used to ridicule religion, morality, patriotism, and productivity." Republican candidate Richard Nixon capitalized on this more conservative sentiment and won the presidency in 1968. In his 1969 speech, he addressed the silent majority, speaking to Americans who were bewildered by all the protests and cultural change and still supported the war.
I know it may not be fashionable to speak of patriotism or national destiny these days, but I feel it is appropriate to do so.
But rock artists continued to experiment with protest through music. Even normally patriotic songs became protest songs. On August 18, 1969, Jimi Hendrix played the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock entirely on his electric guitar. By appearance, this was the opposite of folk music. No lyrics, solely electric, it sounded completely different from folk. But it was a traditional song, the Star-Spangled Banner, and folk songs were often traditional. And even though the performance didn't have words, it was the Star-Spangled Banner. No one needed lyrics. So Hendrix voiced his opinions not through words, but through sounds. He used police sirens and funeral music to give meaning to the song. This articulate protest act was often criticized and found disrespectful. One newspaper editorial commented on the radicalism of Hendrix's performance. Imagine how those same offended, dare we say uptight people would react to Jimi Hendrix's handling of the number. That's right, big bad Jimi Hendrix performing the Star-Spangled Banner. But that was Hendrix's genius. Though people could criticize his performance, this was a patriotic song. Hendrix defended himself from people claiming the performance was disrespectful. He said, "We're all Americans. It was like, go America. We play it the way the air is in America today. The air is slightly static, see?" This protest act shows how far protest music had come in half a decade, showing how protest music evolved to fit the time in the war, and how one of the most articulate protest acts in the Vietnam War era didn't even have words. It was entirely electric. Though Hendrix's performance was, arguably, not folk rock, it pushed the limits of protest music and set the stage for the anti-war movement in the final years of the Vietnam War. When Bob Dylan played his electric guitar at the Newport Folk Festival, less than a year after the U.S. started sending Americans to the Vietnam War, he changed folk music to fit the time. In the heated era of the Vietnam War, folk music really couldn't have survived on its own. So it evolved. All it needed was for someone to plug it in.